Okay, so we talked about brand story last week. Today we're just going to do a quick, just touch on landing experience. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of get people's attention, whether you launch right into your product or whether you do a teaser of the product benefits, large type, bold color, animation, stills, you name it. There are a lot of different ways to get sort of people's attention. Really good job here of looking at a product and breaking it down, finding different perspectives, large type. Okay, first of all, don't do script like that. That's terrible. It looks amateurish. But that's not why we're looking at this site. Some of the things that we're going to look at in the next few minutes are ways to sort of incorporate product photography, or in this case dimensions, shots with type on a website to really get the most out of your products. So all of the things that I'm showing you sort of have, and this one has some. This is all HTML, so it's more difficult to do. But really nice kind of transition from scale, and then sort of finding really interesting sort of transitions. But one of the things we're going to look at is the idea that you can incorporate your product shots, but also incorporate type at the same time. And that's what Apple does really well, and they've done it for 20 odd years. So even with this sort of really interesting sort of transitions and everything, they still find a way to sort of show you these really nice sort of product shots and incorporate text around it. And that absolutely is a great way to sort of get the most out of your product shots, so that you do not have to rely on the quality of the shots to sort of stand alone, because typically if it's just a product shot, most of the time you want to have some sort of type around it, and you can sort of see here Apple is sort of the king of that. So they're very good at sort of taking these shots, close cropping them, finding interesting angles, and then working type around them. So so this can be incorporated in many, you could incorporate your actual dimension shots, or you could also tell a brand story this way as well. So you sort of, as you scroll down, you sort of see these really interesting angles, and at the same time you're telling the brand story through text, and that takes, like I said, that takes a lot of the pressure off of the shots to be absolutely stunning. Okay, I have included this one because it's a really pedestrian way to sort of take a desktop shot. You see that it's a desktop shot here up at the top, and it's got some shadow and it's got some color, and then you've dropped type in beside it, and no matter how you slice it, it looks like a bad sort of Dairyland or commercial or ad. So there are ways to do it that are a little bit more dynamic, and that's typically in the angle. So even sort of doing a little bit of work in working with type and working with color and a little bit more dynamic angles on your packaging or your product can all of a sudden take something that could be very static and dated and give it a much nicer feel. Sometimes it's just really hard to tell if something is good or bad. There's just something that really looks dated here. And so you break it down, you go, well, clearly the packaging is really bad. It's really dated. But then just, to sort of create this stacking, it's really boring, and then everything else around it just falls flat. And then you could play around a little bit with, here's my packaging, and then I'm incorporating it into the background. And there's something here it's getting better. It's still not very good. There's a, the banner at the top is okay, but it's a little bit, I don't know. It's not great, but it's better. And basically what you're doing here is taking a Dimensions product shot and putting a background behind it. This is it's just not great. Okay, so yes, there's no label on the packaging, and it's just a bottle with green gunk in it. But, the one thing about here is now we're getting somewhere, right? So do I love the crappy script? Well, probably by calling it crappy script, you probably know how I feel about that script. However, it does add a nice texture to the background. Really what's going on here is a nice sort of balancing of sort of close cropped ingredients along with some complementary colors and a pretty good balance. And this is just a homepage concept, but there you can see a few different ones. So same thing, right? So just swapping it out. Halsa does a great job of taking what is really pretty average packaging. So you can see their dairy-free oat gurt here, and it's really not very good. It's just blah. But look at what they've done in the background. So why they couldn't have been that kind of free on the packaging and have elements that aren't so average and middle of the road. But what it does do is, that would make a very nice start of a banner, if you had some text to sort of talk about the ingredients or talk about the brand itself. So you can sort of see there's the packaging by itself, not very good, pretty boring, but there it is, adding some elements to the background. And that's what I'm talking about with sort of taking your Dimensions packaging, and you can add drawn elements and type elements, much like Apple does, and all of a sudden you have something that's a lot more interesting. So again, this is just a mock-up, but basically repeated images. So you create the packaging once, and then you overlay it with some text and all of this, and flat background colors, and all of a sudden it's starting to have a lot more of a modern sort of feel to it. So again, this is actually a really nice example of packaging that's not all that exciting, right? So we've got the packaging up here, but what this person has done with it is sort of taken the flat brand colors, added a little bit of texture to it, a nice sort of weighted headline here with the Order Now button, and then as you kind of scroll down, it's a nice set of icons that really sort of tie into the brand itself. And the only thing really missing here is the packaging. The packaging is a little bit small, and I don't know what's going on with that bodybuilder up there, but it's really pathetic. It's just, I don't know if it has to be there, but so if you take out the bodybuilder, it would actually be a lot better, and the rest of it has a pretty nice feel to it. Okay, so in this mock-up, really what we're looking at is very simple sort of wordmark logo. Nice introduction with the headline, Purify Your Skin, Pretty Looks, Resilient Skin, Aging Care, Keep Away Pimples. So not exactly, it's not exactly amazing copy, but the one thing to look at here is, let's say this person created this packaging in Dimensions. So there is a really nice sort of look and feel, and look at these secondary elements that so we're balancing. Ignore this outside green thing with the shadow on it, but just concentrate on the middle here. Nice type, taking some secondary elements like leaves, and these brackets are very unexpected, and then simply using a flat color underneath. So really what you end up getting is a really nice introduction into the website. The type is pretty good, and then picking up on that same sort of look and feel down here, looking at a testimonial, and this is just a mock-up, but still, and then we see the actual packaging by itself, that ends up being a pretty nice brand, you know, a very consistent brand look and feel. Now, I point out this one, even though it's just a mock-up, but let's just say that there was some sort of simple packaging on this background sort of abstract circle. Look at how using sort of desktop photography can really sort of give yourself a little bit of dimension, but keeping it flat and typographic at the same time. So that could easily be complementary packaging laying flat there, or for a lot of you, if there's secondary elements of whatever you're doing, so you know, whether it's granola or coffee or whatever, if you have those elements, look at how these little sort of I don't know what those are, some sort of spices lying flat. You can sort of see how it really starts to work well, and it completely changes the dimension and the feel of the website. So there's some really nice sort of type going on, but at the same time we have these images of the ingredients on the side, some close cropped, so really sort of strangely cropped photograph on the left, but then having the ingredients bleed onto the white. So what ends up happening is you get this kind of seamless, and this was really introduced in the 60s and 70s when advertising often did this with close cropped products and then worked the type around the actual desktop stuff so that there's a seamless transition between the images and the type, and the two work pretty nicely together. So you can sort of see here and something, you know, and then you kind of see, oh, that's a, you know, you get down and you see, wow, that's a really nice way to present the packaging, because when you see, you know, when you see the actual type and the packaging, there really is a nice relationship between the two. So a lot of different ways. And then here what we're looking at is really changing the perspective back to sort of eye level, but still sort of keeping it very white. So some really nice sort of ideas here. On this one, you know, even like pointing out the ingredients and creating these actually really nice little icons, right? So again, you know, I mean, they're pretty good icons, but look at the size that we're using these things, and look at the style that is the style that's being implemented here. So sort of whimsical Illustrator drawn icons, and then this kind of almost like light brushwork in behind it. So it works pretty well. And then showing some ingredients. So these are, you know, these are all, and this is all one sort of a bunch of different things all mixed in together. But you can start getting sort of ideas on how you can sort of implement ingredients into your website as well. Okay, and then I really pulled this one just because if you take say you take your packaging and you kind of do a standard shot, and let's pretend that this is packaging and not just 3 bottles. So we'll stick a couple labels on there, but the one thing to look at here is by sort of using a combination of dimension and then more a banner that's a little bit more interesting on top of it. All of a sudden it gives it a much more modern feel. So, and then again, you know, using elements that are also, so you see the web, you sort of see the iPad here. It's got some lines underneath it which look, you know, pretty nicely, pretty nice. And then you sort of see how, you know, this combination of sticking with like some simple icons, some nice tracked out interesting type, and then really sticking with a color palette can work pretty well. So yeah, just sort of using a little bit more unexpected type, using taking that packaging and then using type and banners over top of it. Now, the last one I'm going to show you is really has nothing to do with this website or this mock-up. The only reason I'm showing this is because of the sort of interesting sort of cropping of this wave. But when I look at this, I kind of think, well, if you're having a hard time with secondary images, let's pretend that this site is sort of like a body wash or something like that. So you could essentially bring in elements like this that sort of remind you of the sort of essence of the brand itself without having So one of the things you want to really be aware of is how do you stage or crop your product, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. This is probably the most standard, but it's probably, you know, one of the most expected and a little bit boring. It's a desktop setup and you work the text around it. Creating interest, think about how you want to crop your packaging when you actually present it. So does it have to be on the homepage banner? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. You would have to make a case as to why it might not be there. But does it have to be a perfect desktop setup like this, which tends to be a little bit expected and a little bit boring? So think about how you're going to crop it. You don't necessarily, we can see the packaging, but maybe we don't need to see the entire package in a perfectly set up situation. What you really want to try and strive for is finding interesting ways to present your packaging that don't make it look like a very static setup. So this one sort of integrates numbers behind it. You can scroll through this, but finding taking that packaging, playing with layers, playing with type can sometimes give you a much fresher approach to straight packaging. So one of the things about Strangelove is look at the interesting ways that they're sort of using space and dimension, and then really simple renderings. But then what they do really nicely is create scenarios and interesting scenes with their actual packaging, and very unexpected, right? So tipping one over and introducing some of the brand illustration underneath, and you know, a less sugar type thing, and just the integration between type and then the packaging and the background works pretty nicely. So if I'll just skip down here. So sometimes reusing your brand elements and having some interesting type can really, that a lot of times that's all you need. So this mock-up is really, it's more product based, but let's just say that was packaging replacing the headset. Working with your brand elements and, you know, playing around with that perspective. Are we looking at a flat image? We're not really, because we're bringing in sort of graphics in behind it. It has a little bit of depth, but has a much different sort of feel when you bring in sort of type and color. So, you know, really to summarize, it's trying to find that balance between getting your brand across, creating a brand story, then finding interesting ways to present your product itself, you know, the integration of imagery of your product, integration of type, color. How do the secondary elements work? Can you use elements from the makeup of the packaging and present them in a different way? Flat, you know, can you use them somewhat flat or close cropped? So there's a lot of different ways to do this stuff, but really what you're after is a consistent sort of web and brand experience, and one that will hold together across the different pages.